what are the causes of unemployment in Vietnam as described in extract 1? And very clearly we have already highlighted, so our answer is quite clear. There is going to be cyclical unemployment, and there is going to be structural unemployment. Okay, so what do you do here is to quote for me, or should I say, pick up some key things that is mentioned in the extracts that will deal with these two issues. There is quite clearly an economic downturn. Okay, there is also weak demand. So you can leave these short phrases from the extract that can tell the marker that you can identify that there is cyclical unemployment. Okay, but of course after that you still have to do some explanation, right? Basically the whole idea is that firms would reduce output as there is insufficient demand. Okay, recall that labor is actually a derived demand. So when the output falls, or when output is reduced, you actually demand less labor, which means that there will be higher cyclical unemployment. Okay, the next thing, structural unemployment. Again, you can quote some evidence from the extracts. You notice that oh well, I'm writing this wrong under the comment section, but it should really be the answer, okay? So it doesn't matter. So for structural unemployment, you lift certain points from the extract. You talk about a transit from labor intensive to capital intensive. So what's happening here is that there is economic restructuring. Okay, and when there is economic restructuring, the people or the workers from the labor intensive industries will become structurally unemployed. Because why? Their skills in the labor intensive industries are no longer needed. Okay, skills in the labor intensive industries are no longer needed, which means that the economy now requires skills in capital intensive industries, but these workers only have skills in labor intensive industries. So therefore what we have here is a skills mismatch. Okay, so 2 points again, identifying that it is cyclical unemployment, that is 1 mark. The explanation is the 2nd mark. Same thing for structural unemployment. Identification is 1 mark, explanation is the other mark. Okay, let us move on to the part C, and you basically are asked to explain the impact of minimum wages on unemployment rate. Okay, so with the help of the diagram, we have made it very clear that a diagram is going to be expected. Okay, and look, I mean, they expect you to have a diagram, and yet it's only 2 marks. So your answers, I guess, shouldn't be too long. Okay, so let us look at the diagram that we are supposed to draw. Basically, you should be drawing a very familiar minimum wage diagram. Okay, and your explanation was quite simple. Basically, what's happening is that you need to explain why the minimum wage laws actually lead to higher unemployment rate. Okay, so what's happening here is that your minimum wage is set above the equilibrium wage at WM. Okay, clearly there's 2 ways that you can explain. At WM, only OL people are hired at wages equals to WM, but at the same time OM people are looking for work, which means taken together this means that I have LM people who will be unemployed. Okay, so clearly then it led to an increase in unemployment, because at the equilibrium price WE there is no unemployment. Okay, but with the minimum wage to WM there is now an increase in unemployment. Okay. The other way that you can see it is that with minimum wage only OL people are hired, but at the original equilibrium price, which is WE, ON people are hired, right? This means that LN number of people is actually retrenched when you implement the minimum wage. Okay, so that is your very simple answer for 2 marks. Now moving on to part 2, you are asked to account for the sharp increase in labor productivity in China. Okay, so now we are at extract 3. Okay, and we already highlighted, because we have spent sufficient time understanding the extracts, we can see that the answers are quite clear. We have already identified a few reasons for the sharp increase in labor productivity. Okay, so these things, all you need to do is to pick one of them and to discuss in detail, because it is only 2 marks. So some of them are things like technological progress, increased investment in physical and human capital. So these are quite a few points. All you need to do, like I said, pick one and explain. So I personally like to talk about technological progress. So what happens basically is that when you have technological progress, this means that you have newer and better machines. Okay, there is newer and better machines for the workers to work on. Alright, this means that workers can now become more productive because you are using better machines. And the implication is that if you have better machines, you can use less resources to produce the same amount of goods. Okay, and that implies an increase in labor productivity. So that's quite a simple answer, again for 2 marks. And lastly, we talked about the one that is slightly more difficult, 6 marks. You are expected to discuss the impacts of a rising labor productivity in the Chinese economy. So a few things to note. Again, discuss implies that you need to have 2 sides of the argument. Okay, and you also want to have a concluding stand at the end of it. The next thing that I want to stress is that every time we see impacts on an economy, what we are expecting is for you to present the impacts in terms of the macro goals of an economy. Okay, and hopefully you still remember the macro goals of an economy, basically low inflation, low unemployment, and sustained economic growth. Okay, so these are the 3 aspects in which you should discuss the impacts on an economy. Okay, then the next question is, what are the 2 sides of the argument do you have for this question? Okay, so the first side of the argument, in this case, I choose a positive versus negative impacts way of discussing. Okay, so I will first talk about what are the positive impacts, and then we talk about what are the negative impacts. Okay, so side 1, this is your positive impacts. So what is happening here is that we know that with rising labor productivity, you actually have a rightward shift of your long run AS. Okay, because why? Because labor productivity ultimately reflects the quality of your labor, which is a factor of production. So when there is an increase in the quality of your factors of production, your productive capacity will increase. Okay, so when your productive capacity increase, graphically that is illustrated by a rightward shift of your vertical part of the AS curve. So what this shows is that there is potential growth. Another positive impact, if you look at this diagram, is that there is a decrease in the general price level, which means that effectively there is a deflation in the economy because general price level has fallen. Okay. Now the last thing that I should discuss is on unemployment. And what I can see here is that given this rightward shift of AS, there is actually an increase in my real national income from Y1 to Y2. Okay, so when there is an increase from your real national income increase from Y1 to Y2, it means then you have actual growth, right? Okay, so that's one more. And not just that, when you have actual growth, there is actually a fall in unemployment. Okay, because you are producing more, right? When you are producing more, you need more workers, you hire more, and therefore there is a fall in unemployment. Okay, are there any other positive impacts that can happen with the increase in labor productivity? Actually, that can be found in your extract 3 in the last paragraph, when it says that with higher productivity, China actually attracted twice the amount of foreign direct investment in 2008 compared to 2002. So what's happening here is that this foreign direct investment actually increases your aggregate demand. So apart from the rightward shift of AS, what's happening here is that AD actually shifts to the right as well. Okay, so when AD shifts to the right, notice then that all the positive effects in terms of economic growth is actually compounded. Okay, I now have a larger amount of actual growth. Okay, when this is my equilibrium point. Okay, so when I have larger amount of actual growth, my unemployment also becomes lower. Okay, so what's happening here, let me just continue the positive effects, is that increase in FDI led to an increase in AD, which means then that I have even higher actual growth and a lower unemployment rate. Okay, but the side effect of that is then that there is actually an increase in GPL. Look, your original equilibrium now is at P2. Now because of the increase in aggregate demand, it is now at a higher level. So you will have higher inflation. Okay. Now, so we have just presented the answer for the positive impacts. So the second side, you have to ask yourself whether there are any negative impacts. Okay, are there any negative impacts of the increase in labor productivity? Again, it can be found in extract 3, and we saw that with the increase in labor productivity, they actually lead to structural changes. and more specifically, you are changing from low value added goods to high value added goods. Okay, so again, I've said before that when there is such economic restructuring, it generally leads to structural unemployment. Okay, I'll leave you to explain in detail in your answer. Okay, so what then is the conclusion? So you have to ask yourself ultimately which effect is the dominant one. Okay, is it the positive effects outweigh the negative effects, or is it the other way around? Okay, a common conclusion is then that the positive effects actually outweighs the negative effects. Okay, how do I justify that? Because remember, the negative effects, essentially it is structural unemployment, right? But structural unemployment can be solved by things like retraining. Okay, so in a sense, structural unemployment is not a long-term thing. What you can get despite the structural unemployment is actually economic growth. As long as you always have economic growth, there will be job creation, which means new jobs will continuously being produced or created, which then means that the people who are structurally unemployed can get a new job as long as they are willing to undergo retraining. Okay, so this means that the negative effects actually is not a big deal. Okay, I can solve it if people are willing to do retraining. Okay, so here that's why I say that the positive effects will outweigh the negative effects.